Floor is all yours.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm uh I am Sir Leohtulf for the Silver Hills. I am the Earl Marshal for the kingdom, and Sarah has asked me to give a quick overview of marshaling in the SCA, specifically heavy marshaling. Large parts of it are not significantly different from rapier marshaling. The only thing that's significantly different is equipment inspections, armor and weapons. Um, so, well, to start off, everyone should marshal. If you are a fighter, you should definitely marshal, because at some point somebody's marshaling so that you can fight. Uh, and so once in a while, it's good for you to marshal so that they can fight. Um, the quick and dirty is that a marshal is not a judge. A marshal is a safety officer and an extra set of eyes for the fighters. The fighters can ask a question. Sometimes if the fighters have a slight disagreement, a marshal can say, hey, this is what I saw. We never say, hey, this shot was good. We never say, hey, this shot was flat. We'll say things like, so from my angle, that shot looked like it landed flat. We always try and phrase things as politely as possible, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. But our primary purpose is to keep everybody safe, particularly the spectators, because really there's nothing safe about our sport. So what are a couple of topics that people would like me to discuss? I'm really not good at improv. Bueller?
Yeah, this
Anyone?
is the
Bueller?
interactive part of the video.
Okay. Changes. Um, most of the recent changes are just clarifications of the rules.
Hey, baby. Have already.
Most of the recent changes are simple clarifications. There have been a couple of changes. The 4-inch hand rule, which is if your hand is more than 4 inches from any edge of the shield, at society level, they say you don't need hand protection. At kingdom level, we say you do. We are still requiring hand protection, even for center grips, for hands that are significantly away, because hands get hit. At practice on Sunday, I got smacked right on the knuckles. I had good hand protection. My fingers aren't broken. So they're trying to make some changes. At one point, they were talking about changing the kidney protection rules, and I believe that has fallen by the wayside for now until they get it clarified. I have not, in the last couple of weeks, really looked through the most recent handbook for specifically for changes, but everything that I have found has been just making things a little more clear. And Sunwolf, yes, the kidney rules, they were going to make them more, basically they were tightening them up so that things like the hero belt that a lot of people wear were not going to be considered sufficient. That has gotten a lot of pushback at society level, and so they've kind of dialed down on that for now, and we will see where that goes. So Wilhelm outlining the process to go from heavy fighter to senior marshal. First off, every heavy fighter is, in my personal opinion, a heavy marshal. Can anybody tell me the actual difference in the authorization of a fighter or a marshal? Go ahead, anybody? Okay, so the difference between a heavy fighter and a heavy marshal is the heavy fighter fought an authorization fight. They're supposed to have the same information. They're supposed to be knowledgeable about the same things. So if you are a heavy fighter, in my opinion, you are a heavy marshal. You may need to mentor with somebody occasionally just so you get the idea of how things actually work on the field. But if you are a heavy fighter, according to the rules, you qualify as a heavy marshal. Now, that is not necessarily the same as a senior marshal. The big difference that a senior marshal has over just a heavy marshal is that senior marshals can authorize fighters. If you don't need to be authorizing fighters in your area, then you don't want to be a senior marshal. Senior marshals get a little bit more accountability. And the big thing, again, is you're trying to learn just exactly. You should already know the rules if you're a heavy fighter, but if you're trying to learn the procedures, get up with someone that you know, and they'll go through it once, then they'll have you go through it. If it's field marshaling, they will put you on a field on the perimeter so you can see what they're looking for. Then they'll move you to holding one of the sticks in the middle, and there you go. Yes, marshal cards tend to expire at the same time as fighter cards. We just add it to the card, and then whenever the fighter card expires, the marshal's card expires.
So Leohtulf, follow-up question. So if we're at the point where we feel comfortable like overseeing people but don't have an official designation, how would we get the next step to senior marshal? What needs to be signed off so we can help other people fight?
Well, the only marshal currently in the kingdom that can make senior marshals is me. And I am limiting the number of senior marshals, particularly on the heavy field, to basically like 1 or 2 per area. If you have a couple of heavy marshals, a couple of senior marshals in the area that are attending practices to get authorizations done, then that's pretty much all we need. One of the things that we found some years ago was everybody and their brother was ending up as a senior marshal, and we were getting people authorized who didn't meet the real requirements to authorize as fighters. They didn't know, so we're trying to tighten down on who is giving out authorization cards for a while.
So as a follow-up question, if we have 3 people come together and neither of us or none of us are senior marshals, we can still have a legal practice, correct?
Sure.
Okay. That was the big thing is sometimes we look around like none of us are warranted specifically as marshals. Can we still have a legal practice? And that's the question that came up.
Yeah. You are all marshals in, as far as the rules go. Just be aware that somebody's going to be responsible for any paperwork. I have never been a huge fan of, oh my God, we don't have a marshal, we have to cancel practice. Training to become a marshal is more or less all hands-on. We will start you out by partnering you with somebody else, usually one of the senior with a lowercase s, marshals on the field, somebody who's been doing it for a while. Viscountess Eva is one of my favorites to pair people with because she's really good at bringing people along. We'll pair you up with someone, put you on a field. Again, you'll probably work the perimeter for a little while. Just make sure nobody gets too close to the fighters. The fighters, they don't get too close to the edge. And then, when you're comfortable, we'll put you in the middle and have somebody watching you there and make sure that you're keeping an eye on things. As far as training to become a come on, mind. Inspecting marshal, again, we're going to pair you with somebody who's been doing it for a while. The way I usually do it is I will show you once how I do it. Make sure to talk through all of the elements while I'm doing an actual inspection. I'm a particular fan of having somebody who doesn't pass inspection while I'm doing these training inspections so that I can point out what's missing. Then usually what I will do is I'll do 1 or 2 of those inspections. Then I'll say, okay, you do 1 and I'll watch. And after I've watched a few times, if you're pretty much catching all the hard parts, then I hand you a pen. As long as you are comfortable signing off that someone meets our requirements. Now, an important distinction is meeting our requirements versus being safe. Let's just throw it out right now. Our sport is not safe. We are not out there as marshals to make the sport safe. We are out there to minimize risk. Just like the armor requirements are not intended to keep fighters safe, they're intended to minimize risk of debilitating injury. If we were trying to keep people safe, there would be much more stringent requirements, more like the folks in Eastern Europe. But we are just trying to minimize risk of debilitating injury. That's why our armor standards is written as they are. They start at the knee because you only get 2 knees and they do break fairly easily. Cover the elbows. There's some protection in the different people, Sarah, different people do it differently. I quiz fighters as when I authorize them, and I will often ask questions while you're marshaling. It's important that you do know what the rules are, but I don't do a formal quiz in general for marshals. I just find it to be better to be hands-on. And it's an important distinction. So in case anybody wonders, I work for a law firm. I'm not a lawyer, but I work for a law firm, so I tend to get very picky about phrasing. And it's important to note that we are, as a marshal, if I sign your authorization card or your authorization card or your inspection card, I'm not saying that you are in your person safe, as in you will not get injured. What I'm saying is that you meet our requirements. If I authorize you, I'm saying that you do not appear to present a danger to the people around you in general, as well as yourself. But I'm not saying that you are 100% safe. I'm saying that from what I've seen, you don't present a danger. Does that answer your question, Wilhelm?
Yep, it sure does.
Good. And I highly encourage anyone who wants to marshal at October Crown. The only thing to remember that you're standing out in the sun for anywhere between 2 and 5 hours usually. So if you have trouble standing up for long periods of time, or if you don't like the heat, be aware of that. I'm not saying don't marshal. I'm saying be aware of your own body's limitations. My lady wife will tell you that I am never aware of those things, and I don't eat enough or drink enough while I'm marshaling. So do as I say, not as I do. And that is why she keeps me around. So let's talk about armor inspections. I can't show off an actual inspection, although I have done that on video in the past. But what I always do is I always start at the bottom. Other people start in different places. My suggestion is pick a location on the mannequin's body and start from there every time, and that way you're less likely to miss things. And I will ask if someone is ready to be inspected and let them know that I will need to make contact with them to inspect them. And the first thing I ever ask is, do you have your groin protection in? That is the first thing I ask. I don't want to check. I don't need you to demonstrate. I see that all too often. People decide to show me that their cup is in by hitting themselves in the groin and then realize they've forgotten it. When you're inspecting, ask whoever comes to you, are you ready to be inspected? Because sometimes, oh, you know what? I forgot my this, that. Sometimes you have a lot of fun and somebody comes up, are you ready to be inspected? Yes. Okay, then you fail. Why? You don't have a helmet on. And yes, I have had that happen while inspecting at a crown. I always start at the bottom. I check and make sure that the feet are covered. In the West, we're not really fans of bare feet or open-toed or those beach shoes that have the toes. Those just make me nervous, and there's no sole protection. Then I check the knees. Now, one of the important thing about the knees is that the knee is a hinge joint, just like the elbow. So if you look at my elbow, it does this and this. It also rotates a little, but not a lot. So the points that we have to protect are this point of bone, this point of bone, and this point of bone here. It's the same for the knees. It's the kneecap and the two extruding bones on the sides. Those must be covered with rigid material. And the definition of rigid material is sort of vague. It's one of the things that does need to be clarified. But usually a layer of hardened leather, 2 layers of unhardened leather of reasonable thickness. And this is one of the things that's kind of hands-on. If you can feel the fighter's bones through whatever they're using to cover their elbows or their knees, it's not sufficient. If I can feel it through the leather, it's not really covered. And so I tend to recommend a minimum of hardened leather, like 8-ounce leather. That's my recommendation. The rules are, like I say, a little bit more vague, allowing for some other things, but 16 to 18 gauge stainless steel, minimum of 14 gauge steel. Usually we prefer them to be a little bit fluted so that they've got a compound curve that makes them less dentable. makes them less likely to collapse. We have seen a lot of plastic elbows and knees. Knees in particular make me a little nervous because I've seen a lot of people who take the leg shot, drop to their knees, and the weight of them hitting their knees cracks the kneecap, cracks the kneecap. From there, we recommend, yes, pickle barrel plastic tends to be okay. It's just a matter of there are circumstances where it becomes brittle. And part of that is sometimes the shaping of the plastic. Usually they'll heat it to shape it, and sometimes if they cool it too fast, it'll become brittle. From the knees, I work up to the legs. We do not require in this kingdom cuisses. I highly, highly, highly recommend them. If you do not have cuisses, you're just asking for massive bruising on your legs or DVT blood clots. Having personal experience with a blood clot recently, you don't want those. They're no fun. From there, I go up and I make sure that the kidneys and the short ribs are no, Son Wolf, they were not my friend. From there, I want to make sure that it's hard to see. Let me turn off the Viking long haul here so you can see a little bit better. So if you look right here, this is the bottom of my rib cage. So the ribs that are right in here are the floating ribs. The kidneys are not here. They are up here. And the kidneys and the short ribs should be protected. The floating ribs in particular. They're a little bit more vulnerable, and you only get 2 sets of kidneys, and having them damaged is not a lot of fun. Oddly enough, we have no requirement for any protection over the sternum. I tend to recommend something that covers the solar plexus and the xiphoid processes, which is the solar plexus is the gap between the ribs in the front, and the xiphoid process is the kind of softer part right at the base of your sternum. Then we go up. At this point, I usually check the shield to make sure that there's no splinters coming off the shield, that there's nothing, and I'll just run my hand around it. And if anything catches my finger, then I go back and look for it. But that's to make sure that there's edging on the shield to protect, literally to protect your opponent's weapons. I will check the hand protection in the shield. The hand protection as written is it's supposed to cover 1 inch above the bend of the wrist. Now, if they have a vambrace that comes up to here and something that covers their hand to here, then that meets the requirements. I will then check the trachea and cervical vertebrae. I'm sorry, which still bugs you?
Just the not requiring the sternum and xiphoid process to be covered. It just seems like it's asking for trouble.
It seems like it, and yet we have not gotten any trouble in 50 years. I personally don't wear anything, but I personally think that people should. Again, do as I say, not as I do. We go up to the neck. The things that need to be covered are the trachea and the cervical vertebrae. The C-spine, the cervical vertebrae is basically at the base of your neck where it meets your shoulder. It's that series of vertebrae. Figure from where your neck meets your shoulder, go down about a hand span, and it should cover that. Now, one of the important things about neck protection is, like, some people will try and get away with something that just covers the trachea, and that isn't actually supported. So if you push on it, it will still go into the trachea. The C-spine likewise. What we recommend is a collar that's got some sort of light padding and then some sort of rigid protection over the trachea, and then usually some sort of a flap that comes down to cover the cervical vertebrae. Absolutely perfect light and kind of early period gorgets are the ones that are made by His Royal Highness Miles. I've been wearing one of those for years. When it's properly worn, it works great. I've been stabbed in the throat and it hasn't hurt at all. From there, I recommend a gorget underneath an aventail. The aventail, for those who don't know, is the male drape that hangs down. And I recommend that there be a gorget under it. Technically, it's not required if there is sufficient drag. So if I thrust into that camel, if it doesn't push back into the throat, then that's usually considered sufficient. Most of them don't quite do that. And frankly, you only get one trachea, and I have zero interest in performing an on-the-field tracheotomy. The helmet. One of the important things is that the helmet may not have any gaps in it that a 1-inch dowel can slide through. Pretty simple. I carry Marshall's gauges with me that show they are measured to 1 inch. They're calibrated. Fortunately, my thumb right here is approximately 1 inch. So if it looks any smaller than that, then I can go check it with a gauge. A lot of the newer helmets with the fancy face plates, they're just not generating the large holes. One of the things to be aware of is the direction that the bars run. My helmet, the bars run in general horizontally. So I want to check the vertical gap on the bars. If the helmet is one of the ones where the bars run vertically, then you need to check the horizontal gap. There are a lot of helmets right now. A lot of people were wearing the old Valsgard helmets, which are the ones that you could buy the kit from Eric der Helmschmidt with the oculars and everything. Those are great. But if you don't make them properly, then the eye hole gaps a little bit. And we want to make sure eyes are particularly vulnerable to being damaged. Let's not do that. And there are a lot of different ways to fill that gap. So my rule, my primary rule when I'm marshaling anything is I want you to go out and fight and have fun, which means I'm not looking to bounce anyone. I want to make sure that your armor meets our standard, and therefore you're probably going to be able to come play with us again next week. So I'm going to do everything I possibly can to get you on the field, including I have loaned out my helmet to people. So one of the things that we are investigating is reducing the amount of padding required in thrusting tips. Personally, I like the idea. It makes things a little bit more like what you're expecting to feel. If I get hit I feel a crack of the rattan against my helmet. If I get thrusted, usually what I'm feeling is kind of a mush, and then maybe I'll start to get that pressure of the rattan. The less padding that we feel is required, the easier it's going to be to where you don't feel like you have to drive as hard. One of the issues that we've run across is the padding gives, the weapon slides off, it doesn't actually stick. The fighter doesn't notice it or doesn't feel it was sufficient. So the next one is a lot harder. It sticks more square, it doesn't slide off, and now we have somebody who's injured. And in general, that's not our job. Our job is not to say you are being hit hard enough, but we can tell fighters where it hit. We can mention that they're getting hit a lot, but it's not our job to say how hard they're being hit. That covers most of inspection. One of the other things, you make sure that both hands are protected either with a basket hilt or with gauntlets. What I'll do a lot of times is when somebody throws their gauntlets on, I'll just have them grip my hand and I can see if the metal on the gauntlet is bottoming out. I want to make sure that the metal on the edges contacts the rattan with enough room that it's not flattening the fingertips underneath. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I'm going to start with Sunwolves because it goes back to armor. Important armor tip for new fighters. Van braces. Forearms are some of the most easily broken bones. Collarbones are good too, but van braces are very useful just because the bones will break fairly easily and they tend to be out in front of us. I could get hit on the arm while I'm in stance, while I'm in the middle of throwing a blow. I have banged my arm against a shield, and that really hurts. And I know people who've done the same thing and cracked the bone. To be honest, most fighters probably have broken or cracked bones that they never knew they had. The process for a new fighter card. Well, first off, you need to do some fighting. I recommend having at least your own helmet, but helmets are expensive, so a good loaner is acceptable. In general, we're going to quiz you. We're going to quiz you on some of the things. Well, Brian, let me rephrase before I go into too much detail. Are you asking about getting the card, or are you asking about being authorized? Okay. The card is a different question. Give me just a minute here. I actually have this bookmarked on my other computers, so. Okay. All right. So in general, what's going to happen is if your card has expired, you're going to send an, you're going to go to this website that I'm just posting in the chat and fill out the form. And then you're going to put in whoever your marshal, your local marshal is, or something along those lines. You cannot authorize yourself, but you can fill out the information in that. And then our database deputy, Baroness Lux, who is amazing, will get the card out to you in the mail. We're working on a receipt process for this so that when you fill out the form, you will get a receipt, or within a day, you will get a receipt emailed to you that will indicate that, yes, you are authorized, your card is in process, just like the membership cards. So for a new fighter, typically what's going to happen is you're going to go through the authorization process, and then the senior marshal who did the authorization will fill out this form, put themselves in as the authorizing marshal, and again, Lux will add it to the database and then send out the form or send out the card. Now, the process of getting authorized is a little bit more involved, and involves actually fighting. We'll usually give a quick quiz on the rules. We'll ask some of the more common rules. I have my favorite trick question. If you've ever been authorized as a fighter, when is it acceptable to hit your opponent in the back? This is my trick question. Feel free to answer in the chat. Come on, nobody? Okay, so the short answer is when you're engaged with them. If I am engaged with my opponent and I turn my back on them, they are welcome to hit me in the back. I have made a mistake and turned my back on them. If they are standing in front of me, they may hit me in the back. If I charge through a line and I push past someone, they may hit me in the back. As long as we are engaged at the time of contact. If I get a couple of steps away from them and they have to actually turn and chase me, we're no longer engaged. But if I am engaged with someone, then it is perfectly acceptable for me to hit them in the back. I try not to be a jerk about it, but it is absolutely within the rules to strike your opponent in the back if you are engaged with them. And for the record, if you are fighting in a tournament and you are in single combat with someone on the list field, you're engaged with them from the time we say lay on. Sorry, I'm putting in an order for a drink. Indeed. Always follow Wheaton's law. Don't be a jerk. Are there any other questions? Unfortunately, for me, marshaling is very much a hands-on and visual sport. So trying to just talk about it for an hour is not the easiest thing in the world. But does anyone have any other questions? And just so everyone is aware, when I say that you have to meet the same requirements to be a marshal as you do to be a fighter, except for the authorization fight, that includes the waiver. Marshals are supposed to have waivers on file that say, yes, I know I can get hit in the head while I'm out here marshaling. Where can you find me to marshal? So normally I would say at any crown or coronet event. I will be at Perg this weekend. I know that there are some tournaments being fought, so I will undoubtedly be helping out with that. Or I might fight, we'll see. I don't know yet if I'll be at Great Western because we've got some upheaval at work. I will be at Crown. Right now, I'm working with my deputy on Crown, but you can find someone to team up with to marshal at virtually any Crown Principality event, any local event where they're having fighting. And yes, my deputy is an awesome marshal. In most ways, he's a far better choice for Earl Marshal than I am because he's also a very experienced rapier fighter, which I'm not. And in case anyone was curious, one of the things about the Earl Marshal is we are not only in charge of heavy marshaling in the kingdom, but the Earl Marshal is responsible for all martial activities. That includes rapier, it includes equestrian, it includes archery. So it is, if you are looking to take on a principality or kingdom level marshal's job, I highly recommend that you become at least familiar with the rules for all of the martial disciplines that we have in the kingdom. Even if you don't participate, participating in equestrian is sometimes an expensive proposition. But even if you don't participate, you should try and become familiar with the rules. Any other questions? Okay. Well, sounds like there aren't any more questions. And I spend too much of my day trying to make stuff up to talk about off the top of my head, so I'm gonna stop doing that now.
You want me to stop the video?
Sure.
Yes, here we go.